The more testosterone someone produces, the more they are inclined to make a risky bet. On the trading floors of the city, Wall Street, and Tokyo, the traders are often young men and in the prime of their life. They are producing testosterone at a maximum level. Is the global economy being managed by a group of dominant young men under the influence of their hormones? In certain situations, can this overload of testosterone make some traders go crazy? For Jean-Jacques Lejeune, a former trader, this hypothesis may be right.
On prend des jeunes hommes avec un ego assez affirmé.
We take these young guys with big egos, typically chosen for their analytical capabilities, and they usually have a healthy dose of testosterone.
Parmi cette population, vous allez avoir
So within this group, you're going to sometimes have that famous mad trader, and it's going to happen that you'll see irrational behavior.
Irrationnel au sein de cet endroit.
The secrets of the trader's behavior is gradually revealed. Their greed, their emotions generated by risk-taking, and most of all, their visceral fear of losing all, contribute to how they make their decisions. Their hormones only reinforce this phenomenon. But to better understand the psychological and physiological mechanisms, we have to look deeper inside the human body and enter the brain. Inside the cerebral cortex lies the source of all our daily actions, from our most simple movements to our most complicated thoughts, our childhood memories and our feelings today. It's all controlled by the billions of entangled neurons that cover the skull. Even financial decisions, a trader's choice to buy or sell, to take a risk or remain cautious. For a long time, the human brain remained a mystery to the scientific community. But over the past 10 years, sophisticated imaging devices have been developed that allow us to observe the brain in action. Here in Lyon, France, we enter at the Institute of Cognitive Science, a prestigious center for research and neurosciences. Jean-Claude Dreyer and his team of students are studying a specific phenomenon, the brain's reactions after winning. Individuals are placed in front of slot machines under imaging devices. There's no risk-taking. They aren't given any money to gamble. Instead, they are merely waiting to see if they fall upon a winning combination. 3 types of prizes are randomly distributed: a sum of money, food, or an erotic image. On their screens in real time, the researchers measure the brain's reactions. They make an initial observation. In the result of a victory, 3 sections of the brain are specifically activated: the amygdala, the striatum, and the part of the prefrontal cortex located between the eyes. These zones are widely known by specialists to be associated with the sensation of pleasure. The results show that winning sends a rush of good feelings through the head. They also make a surprising discovery. The activated zones are identical regardless of the nature of the prize: money, food, or sex. the effect is the same.
Whether it's for money or another reward, such as an erotic stimuli or food, for example, there is a system that's called the reward system that is regulated by a molecule called dopamine. This system is an old one.
Throughout evolution, feeling enriched has become just as important and gratifying as eating and reproducing. The neural circuit connected to this phenomenon is what scientists have named the reward system, which involves the very famous molecule dopamine, also known as the pleasure chemical. With each positive result, dopamine is released by neurons in the back of our brains and then spreads amongst the amygdala, striatum, and prefrontal cortex. These zones trigger a feel-good wave throughout the rest of the brain and body. The bigger the win, the more dopamine released. It's this process that can propel a trader into a state of total exhilaration.
Quand vous arrivez à gagner 50, 100, 200,
when you win $50, $100, $200,000 in a few minutes, that's a lot of money in a small amount of time. There's a certain kind of satisfaction, a feeling that's exhilarating. The thing is to know how to manage it. There's unfortunately a downward spiral that happens to most people, though. It's when they want to win more than the time before. Say you win a lot on the first or second try. There's this incredible euphoria that comes over you. If we're not careful, we can quickly tumble into that downward spiral of taking more and more risk, all to win more.
Playing to win more each time activates the reward system of the brain. Successive wins result in an increased release of dopamine, and the testosterone produced by young men only intensifies the production of this pleasure molecule. It's an addictive state of mind, to say the least. For neuroscientist Matthias Pisiglione, a specialist in motivational brain behavior, this brain mechanism could explain the nearly uncontrollable attraction towards risk that overwhelms some traders.
Dopamine reinforces the actions that result in reward. It's a simple mechanism. This might explain addiction in all types of behaviors that give in the pleasure. Whether it's drugs or compulsive shopping, it's the type of addiction that can happen in traders, even if they're just winning here and there. These occasional wins will trigger these dopamine rushes and will encourage their behavior.
After experiencing this rush, it's hard to do without. And I know lots of traders who try to give it up but can't help but keep at least some small account somewhere to keep it going. Because it's exhilarating. I have to say it's exhilarating. And it's what's going to cause the losses for a lot of people in the market. There's something addicting, something powerful that will continue to push you and make you dependent on it.
When I started the studies on the trading floor, so I was back on a trading floor, but not as a trader, and I heard all the familiar sounds of the trading floor, it was almost irresistible. I was holding my hand back from picking up the phone and placing a trade.
But in our endless quest for pleasure, our brain offers another major influence, irrational and unconscious: fear. Zurich, the dynamic global city of northeastern Switzerland. It's a banking paradise and is the home of the 6th largest stock market in the world. Finance has long been the pillars of the city's economy. In the basement of a hospital, a special laboratory has recently opened. The SNS Lab, founded by Ernst Fürn, a worldwide renowned economist. He believes that traders' decisions are influenced greatly by their emotions, no matter the amount of money at stake.
They are human beings, you see, and they are subject to irrational impulses like any other human being. There's some emotions that are guiding our decision-making in a very rational way. What's irrational is when there are emotions that are irrelevant for my experienced value, but they play a role at the time of decision-making. Like when I was angry before I made the decision, then that anger should not color my decision, but it does. Or when I'm under the threat, under some danger. I solved that. So, what did you get?
For several months, Ernst Fehr and Christian Ruff, the laboratory director, have been conducting shocking experiments to better understand how stress and fear influence our decision-making. In one of the experiments, the volunteers play a typical gambling game while placed under an MRI. But before they can even make their choices and decide to bet or not, a screen flashes in front of them. If it's blue, nothing happens. But if it's green, it indicates that they will receive an electric shock at the end of the game. The shock is small but painful, and most importantly, it will be administered regardless if they win or lose.
They don't actually get many shocks, but they know in certain conditions where the screen has a particular color, it is possible that they're going to get shocked very strongly, and it's quite painful. And we can measure by their skin conductance, for instance, that they really are quite anxious when they know that they might get shocked. And we then measure their financial risk-taking behavior. So we're quite interested in finding out how does the brain value things and value risks in particular when you're in a tense, anxious state versus when you're in a relaxed state.
Two zones of the brain are activated during this stressful game. The amygdala, which represents both positive and negative emotions, and the anterior insula, which is linked to the feeling of disgust. Under these conditions, the participants are much more likely to take risks. Even though the shock is totally random and unrelated to their performance, the threat of it puts them in a trance. They just want to finish and get themselves out of this terrible situation as quickly as possible. The stress has made them incapable of making good decisions.
That danger at the time of decision-making affects my decision-making, even though it has no impact whatsoever. A threat of shock is a pretty strong emotional stimulus, and it activates the anterior insula very strongly. And it's kind of a loss. You see, it's the threat of a loss. And so these emotional components play a big role in risk-taking.
In trading environments, there's lots of stress and pressure. How does such stress and pressure, such background emotions, how does that influence our choices? The finding so far is that when you're relaxed, your brain encodes much more the positive things. What can you possibly win? Whereas as soon as you switch, on a trial-by-trial basis, really, to a negative anxious state, your brain focuses much more on what you could possibly lose, so the negative consequences.
To play or not to play, fight or flee. Our behavior is the result of our subconscious reactions, the inherent impulses of our brain. But despite these emotional reflexes, humans possess a safeguard: reason. To uncover exactly where our analytical ability lies inside our brain, Christian Ruff has developed an unusual method based on neurostimulation. He uses electrical pulses to activate specific neurons.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to localize the area in your brain that we want to stimulate today. For that, you would have to put up these glasses, please.
The technique is non-invasive and generally non-painful. Using a pointer, he starts by localizing a specific area of the brain in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This zone is believed to be connected with conscious decision-making.
Perfect. Okay, we have it.
Then a unique apparatus is installed. It generates a carefully controlled magnetic field, which will literally numb the neuron.
Okay, we're starting now.
The dorsolateral cortex is now entirely inoperative for a few minutes. This is when the researchers ask a series of financial questions in several different contexts. The result: without the use of their dorsolateral cortex, the participants appear to be even more sensitive to loss. In an attempt to get out of the situation, they take even more risks than they would normally if they had 100% brain capacity.
The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex may actually influence these automatic emotional responses in order to allow people to overcome these emotional states, right? And to basically accept that a certain loss is better in this case than taking a risk. So it's not just the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex that we think is driving behavior, but it's more the influence that the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex might have on these emotional areas, such as the amygdala and the insula.
By influencing the instinctual reactions of the brain, this region of the cortex could be considered the command center for decision-making. It's like a cognitive shield that prevents us from being controlled by our impulses.
We can perhaps think of the brain like an orchestra. So there's different special brain areas that each have a particular function, like instruments in an orchestra. They all have distinctive sounds. And in the brain, it's similar. On the one hand, there's the brain reward system. This is a system that basically encodes what's valuable to us, what's rewarding to us. And then there's also other brain areas that encode emotional states that are constantly active, trying to evaluate everything that's happening out there in the world. And these are basically all areas that you might say encode somewhat automatic impulses, emotional impulses. On the other hand, we have areas of the outer surface of the brain that control the brain function in line with what we've learned, with our conscious experience. And all of these different areas, like in an orchestra, basically need to play together and form one coherent state of the brain. And we can think that sometimes there's a competition. Our emotions can influence what we think, but we can also influence our emotions by what we're thinking. And ultimately, the brain tries to assign one specific value to each option and then choose from this list of options with their values the one that seems most attractive.
The brain essentially has two complementary systems of thinking. One, quick and automatic, based on our emotion. The other, more reason-oriented, evaluating in detail the possible consequences of our decisions. But caught in the frenzy of the trading floor, this process of consciousness proves too slow and useless. Therefore, feeling usually trumps reason.
In a trading floor, decisions need to be taken very quickly. They need to be taken often based on limited information, and they're taken in a competitive setting. Here, of course, it's hard to take decisions in a, say, careful and slow manner. Our brain might not even have the time to represent every possible complex aspect that goes with a decision to buy or to sell.
A visceral fear of losing and a consuming desire to win. Rob Hoffman, a trading professor based in Chicago, claims that these two reflexes are the two greatest enemies of traders playing the stock market. whether you're a professional or not.
Emotions that really drive the market are fear and greed. We fear loss and we want to make lots of money. And I see even, I see gamblers, people that like to play poker, casinos. I see people like this want to get into the markets because they see lots of money can be made very fast, but they don't think about the loss that can happen, or they think it won't happen to me. I'm better than the market.
What's horrible with stories like with Kerviel at Société Générale and others is that it's a classic pattern for lots of people. Even someone with $5,000 or $10,000 in their equity savings plan can fall into the same trap. Meaning they take a position, fall in love, and then they're not able to get out because they don't want to admit they made a mistake. And then they're just stuck in this downward spiral. It's the biggest threat to anyone.
Mankind is somewhat programmed to make mistakes in stressful situations, as if our biological makeup is not appropriate in the context of a stock market. This is precisely the theory of Sacha Bourgeois-Giron, professor and neuroeconomist at the University of Panthéon-Assas in Paris. He believes that our brain hasn't had enough time to adapt to the modern economy.
Currency appeared nearly 7,000 years ago, which is nothing compared to the perspective of brain evolution. Finance markets haven't been around that long. They're only 20 years old in their contemporary form. It's a rather recent thing. We know that our brain has learned to evolve over millions of years. It has adapted to many different environments. The dangers of predation, of domination, the brain has remained aware, but it must also adapt to modern forms of decision-making. How can it adapt to that, knowing that it's a small period of time and there's no possibility of anatomical change in the brain? It takes a long time, not 7,000 years, but much, much more. Financial markets are places of competition, predators, hunting, killing, in a metaphorical sense, but not completely metaphorical. I tend to believe that there's a form of cortical cultural recycling, meaning that cultural environments have influenced our brains to recycle old, adaptive, cerebral recourses from past environments to use towards new environments.
Far from being a Homo economicus, the trader is above all a Homo sapien, immersed in a hostile environment, compelled to take risks and prone to addiction. Given this somewhat weak human assessment, a tempting solution might be to replace traders with computers. However, even machines have their limits, and it seems impossible to remove human control completely from the markets. There will always be traders on the trading floor. So how do we improve their performance? How to avoid abuse in the market and ensure rational decision-making? Science has been making great strides in understanding the brain, and the concept to artificially manipulate man is already in place.
In the military in certain states, there's a lot of interest in neurostimulation, in particular to enable soldiers to take the right decisions in particular situations. With respect to traders, I mean, technically, I think it would be possible to influence brains in a way that decisions are taken in a particular style. This is what our experiments are about. There are people thinking about the future who start predicting that humans might become more and more bionic.
Bionic traders with electrodes screwed into their skulls is not yet a reality. Instead of modifying men, some argue that it's the work environment that needs a total overhaul.
What's the most flexible? Is it our biological makeup or our economic environment in which we live? Should we change the nature of man, or should we readapt our environments, politically, socially, and economically, so that we can ultimately be the most efficient possible in these modified environments?
Humanizing the codes of the financial markets. The initial results of neuroeconomic studies lay the foundation for a new market theory where man is keystone. On the individual level, traders must become better trained to handle their emotions.
More than an asset manager, I'm almost more a human emotions manager. We work as rigorously as possible, but even with experience, it takes a lot of work each week, each month, to stay on the right path.
Discipline and risk management, that would make a good trader.
Banks and trading firms need to review the culture of the trading floor and, above all, modify the allocation of bonuses.
The companies need to have an architecture of primes that directs people in the right way so that they don't make mistakes that lead to these huge losses that sometimes happen from rogue traders and so on.
Despite the stock market crash of 2008, no new regulation has been put into place. Yet neuroeconomists seem unanimous. If nothing is done, another global financial crisis could strike at any moment.